The red light blinked once, then stayed solid. I stared at the door reader, half expecting it to be a glitch. I swiped my badge again. Beep, red. Access denied. That was the moment. Not a grand announcement, not a final meeting or farewell email. Just a blinking red light at the side entrance. Exactly 6:00 p.m. I stood frozen in front of the door I'd walked through every weekday for the last 27 years. Same coat, same briefcase, same routine. Only now. The system I built didn't recognize me. For a few seconds, I didn't move. Couldn't. It wasn't confusion. My mind knew what had happened, but my body just refused to accept it. I looked down at the badge still hanging from my neck, still marked Senior Compliance Officer in clean Helvetica. 6:00, not a minute early, not a minute late. My pension, $2.4 million, accumulated over nearly 3 decades, was scheduled to activate the next morning at 9:00 a.m. I'd spent the past year preparing for retirement, cleaning up final reports, training my junior staff, planning a quiet departure with dignity, but someone else had a different plan. The security guard approached with a tight-lipped smile. "Ma'am, I've been instructed to escort you off the property. HR will be in touch tomorrow." No explanation, no apology, not even eye contact. I wanted to ask why, or who approved this, or how long they'd planned it, but I couldn't get the words out. Instead, I followed him silently through the side exit. The fluorescent lights hummed above us like nothing had changed. But everything had changed when we reached the glass doors. I turned around. The building loomed behind me like a monolith. Tall, indifferent, blank. The company I had given everything to for almost 3 decades had locked me out with military precision. Down to the exact minute my financial security was supposed to lock in. This wasn't a clerical error, it was an execution. I stepped into the cool evening air, the chill seeping through my sleeves. My phone buzzed once. A calendar reminder. Pension eligibility confirmed. Welcome to retirement. Jessica. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just stared at it. Then I pressed delete. And that was when I knew. This wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated. And someone had planned this down to the second. I didn't sleep that night. Not a minute. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my work clothes, staring at the closed laptop I wasn't allowed to take with me. I kept replaying the sound of the door scanner. Beep. Red. Access denied. It echoed louder than any shouting ever could. Louder than any goodbye I never got. 27 years. Gone. Erased with the flick of a security override and a silent escort out the door. I wasn't naive. I'd seen layoffs. I'd watched good people pushed out after acquisitions, during budget cuts, or when someone new wanted to restructure. But I had always believed that when it came to me, when my time came, they would at least have the decency to say it to my face. I was wrong. There was no message, no exit interview, no plaque or speech, not even a form email, just a dead badge and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me to disappear, to vanish cleanly, without ripples, as if I'd never existed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt small. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself some tea, and stared out the window at the empty street. Chicago had this way of looking indifferent at night, just like the building that had spat me out hours earlier. For nearly 3 decades, I'd been the firewall, the last stop. I'd protected that company like it was my own child. I stayed late, worked weekends, cleaned up other people's messes without ever asking for recognition. I didn't need praise, but I never expected to be discarded like protocol. I thought of the financial crisis in 2008, when I found the buried derivatives report that saved us from a $140 million penalty. Or the time I personally rewrote our European compliance procedures in 2 sleepless weeks after a merger nearly breached privacy law, things no one else wanted to handle. But I did, because I knew how much was at stake. None of that mattered anymore. At 10:45 p.m., I checked my phone one last time. My company email was still synced. I opened it, knowing full well access could be revoked at any second. Most messages were cold system notices, permissions revoked, files locked, access terminated, but buried beneath the system alerts. One subject line caught my eye. "Jessica, thank you." It was from a client, a high net worth investor I'd advised personally through a messy compliance audit. He'd written the day before. I opened the message. "I just wanted you to know how much your integrity meant to us. In this industry, it's rare to find someone who does the right thing when no one is watching. Your voice carried weight. Your judgment gave us confidence. If this is truly your last week at Del Mar, I hope they gave you the send-off you deserve." They didn't. They gave me a blinking red light. Before I could reply, a pop-up appeared. "Your session has expired. This account has been deactivated." I stared at the screen as it faded to black, and just like that, my last thread to the career I'd built was cut. No goodbyes, no thank yous, just silence. And yet, out of all the noise, that email stuck with me, because even if the company chose to erase me, someone still remembered. I met Ethan Vale for the first time in the executive boardroom on the 28th floor. He walked in like he owned the skyline. Sharp suit, Rolex just visible beneath the cuff, smile too perfect, handshake too firm. He was one of those people who knew how to look impressive before saying a single word, because the words rarely mattered. Image was the currency he dealt in, and from the moment he sat at the head of the table, I felt the ground begin to shift. "I'm here to modernize," he said. "We're not just a financial firm. We're a brand now. It's time we look, move, and think like a company ready for Wall Street." IPO. That was the word he kept dropping like confetti. Every conversation, every memo, every hallway whisper, it all led back to that. He wanted to take Del Mar public within 18 months. And he wasn't shy about the fact that compliance, internal audit, and other slow processes were in his way. I watched the other executives nod along like trained birds. Most were new faces, his people, brought in over the past few months, the ones who owed him their careers. They weren't interested in caution. They were chasing bonuses, stock options, fast wins. But I'd seen this before, in 2001, in 2008, in 2015. Short-term thinking dressed up as bold leadership. At first, I tried to keep an open mind. I even offered to brief Ethan personally on our regulatory roadmap. He never responded. Instead, he sent his chief of staff, a 28-year-old former social media strategist who couldn't tell the difference between SEC and SEO. Still, I kept doing my job, quietly, thoroughly, but the mood changed. Meetings I used to lead were reassigned, documents bypassed my desk. A new efficiency committee formed, one that somehow excluded the very departments designed to protect the company. My calendar grew emptier, the tone in emails cooler. And then came the moment that still burns in my mind. I was walking past the conference room near legal one evening, late, as always. The lights were on, the door slightly cracked. I heard Ethan's voice. "She's the last real roadblock," he said. "Once we clean out the legacy staff, we can run leaner and smoother. I want the old guard gone by quarter's end. Quietly. No noise. Full restructure. Keep it silent." I stopped cold. I wasn't supposed to hear that. I wasn't even meant to be in the building at that hour. But there it was. Plain and sharp. I wasn't a respected veteran. I was an obstacle to be cleared. I walked away before anyone saw me, hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, from fury. It wasn't the ambition that bothered me. I've worked under plenty of visionaries. It was the disrespect, the erasure, the way he spoke of people who'd held this company together for decades like they were expired warranty plans. That night, I drove home without the radio on, just the sound of my own breath and the ticking of the turn signal. I knew what was coming now. The question wasn't if, it was when. And somewhere, deep inside, a quiet part of me whispered, if they want a quiet exit, they'll get one, but not the kind they're expecting. It started with a footnote. I wasn't even supposed to be reviewing that quarterly breakdown, technically. It had already passed the CFO's desk. But habit dies hard, and something about the numbers just didn't sit right. The revenue jump from our West Coast division was too clean, too symmetrical. 10% growth across 3 verticals, all reported within the same week? That never happens, not organically. I zoomed in on the line item buried under deferred revenue recognition. The figure was unusually high, almost triple the average for that quarter in previous years. And the justification field was blank. That blank space hit me like ice water. I clicked through to the source file. Missing, not restricted, not archived, missing. Entire folders gone from our cloud archive, with a last modified timestamp of 2:11 a.m., 3 nights ago. That alone wouldn't be alarming if not for the audit trail. Every major financial change had to be logged. And yet, there was no record of who modified the archive, no internal ticket, no backup copy. It was like the data had never existed. I sat back, frowning, and pulled out my notebook. If there was one thing I knew how to do after nearly 3 decades in compliance, it was follow the smoke. I jotted down the file names, cross-checked them with printed reports from a month prior, and started building a pattern. There it was again, another spike, this time in the Southeast region, tied to licensing fees reallocation, and again, no detailed breakdown, 2 suspicious anomalies in 1 quarter. That's not a coincidence, that's a strategy. I emailed finance to request clarification. Polite, professional. I CC'd Ethan and the VP of Risk. The response came back 3 hours later, from an intern. Hi, Jessica. Per Ethan's guidance, we've moved to a condensed reporting model. These figures have been approved. No further review is required. Thanks. I read the message twice. Then again. No further review? Since when did review become optional in compliance? I replied immediately, asking for supporting documentation, the original revenue contracts, anything that would explain the adjustments. No one answered. By the next morning, my access to the West Coast folder had been revoked. That was when the suspicion started to bloom, slow and cold, like a frost creeping through glass. I wasn't just being sidelined. I was being deliberately blocked. I went down to accounting in person. The junior manager looked uncomfortable the moment he saw me. He stammered something about new protocols and told me he wasn't authorized to share details. Who is? I asked. He hesitated. Only Ethan and the IPO committee. I left the office with my heart hammering in my chest. Back in my apartment that evening, I opened my old external hard drive. Over the years, I'd gotten into the habit of saving mirror copies of important reports. Not out of paranoia, but out of professionalism. Now, it felt prophetic. I compared the last archived version of our Q3 data with the version from the company system. The changes were unmistakable. Entries removed, dollar amounts modified, documentation stripped, dozens of small edits, none of which had passed through the required oversight process. The numbers had been cooked, quietly, surgically. I stared at the screen, blood draining from my face. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This was calculated, precise enough to boost our valuation without raising external flags, but reckless enough to collapse under an audit. And someone had wiped the evidence in the dead of night. Whoever it was didn't just want to look good for the IPO. They were willing to gamble the entire company's integrity to do it. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over the SEC contact I hadn't used in years. Then I stopped. Not yet. This wasn't just about ethics anymore. It was about timing, about leverage. So instead, I did what I always did. I documented everything: screenshots, email headers, access logs. I stored them on 2 drives, one for my lawyer, one for me. And as I zipped up the files, the question echoed in my head louder than anything. What happens when the truth becomes a liability? That night, I didn't sleep. Again. But not from anger. This time, it was something else, something colder. They weren't hiding mistakes. They were hiding something far bigger. The envelope was cream-colored and thicker than necessary, too formal for what it really was. I sat across from Cynthia, the head of HR, in a windowless conference room on the 22nd floor. She was younger than me by 2 decades, impeccably dressed, with a legal pad in front of her and a pen she never used. Her voice was soft, measured, like she was reading from a script she'd practiced in front of a mirror. "Jessica, the executive team understands this transition has come as a surprise," she said, "but they wanted to ensure you're taken care of." Taken care of. That phrase sat in the back of my throat like a stone. She slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a severance agreement masked as a retirement package. A generous sum, at first glance. A few months' salary, outplacement services, and a glowing letter of recommendation, but buried on page 4, in tight, sterilized font. Was the line that mattered? "In signing this agreement, the employee waives the right to disclose any internal operations, financial processes, or regulatory concerns to external parties, including but not limited to federal agencies. In other words, keep your mouth shut, and we'll pay you to vanish." I didn't pick it up. I didn't even touch it. Instead, I sat still, letting the silence stretch. Cynthia cleared her throat. "You'd still be eligible for your pension," she added, like it was a sweetener. "And this route ensures there's no disruption." Disruption. What a neat little word for the kind of rot I'd uncovered. What a polished euphemism for cooking books and silencing witnesses. But then the other voice crept in, the one I kept locked away at night, the one that asked, "Is this really your fight? Haven't you given them enough already? Maybe it's time to walk away." Quietly, with dignity. My hands were folded tightly in my lap. I could feel the heat in my chest, shame, anger, doubt, all tangled together. For 27 years, I followed every policy, every rule. I didn't bend or play politics. And where had that gotten me? Discarded, sanitized, papered over. I looked up and opened my mouth to respond. But then, a soft knock came at the door. Cynthia glanced up. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Rachel, our summer intern, stepped halfway inside. She was barely 21, still in the stage of her career where wide eyes and nervous energy carried you through 12-hour days. Her hands were full of files. When she saw me, she froze. "Oh, sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know you were in a meeting." "It's okay, Rachel," I said, my voice catching in my throat. She hesitated at the threshold for just a moment longer. Then she smiled, genuinely, shyly, and said, "I hope I can be like you one day, Ms. Harmon." And then she was gone. The door closed, and with it, the room fell silent again. But something in me had shifted. I stared at the envelope, all at once. I saw the choice clearly, not a legal choice, not even a professional one, a moral one. Because Rachel was watching, and there would be more like her, young women stepping into rooms they don't yet realize are built to erase them. What kind of example would I leave behind if I traded silence for safety? I slid the envelope back across the table. "I won't be signing that." Cynthia blinked. "Jessica, I strongly advise." "You can advise whatever you want." I said calmly. "But if you want to take away my pension, you'll have to say it out loud, on the record. I won't help you bury the truth." She stared at me, jaw tight, unsure what to say next. I stood up, smoothed my coat, and turned toward the door. As I walked out, I passed Rachel again, this time in the hallway, absorbed in a spreadsheet. She looked up, surprised, and I nodded to her. She didn't know what had just happened behind that door, but one day, she might. And when that day came, I wanted her to remember this moment and know there was a line worth holding, even when it hurt, especially when it mattered. I wasn't angry anymore. The emotion had passed like a storm front, loud, messy, brief. What replaced it was quieter, colder, purposeful. I knew I had just crossed a line. Refusing to sign that agreement put a target on my back. There would be no more second chances. No more polite HR invitations. The gloves were off now, and they knew it. But so did I. That night, I made a pot of strong black coffee, cleared the clutter off my dining room table, and pulled out 2 hard drives. One labeled JH, private. The other legal backup. I hadn't touched either in months. I'd started building them years ago. Long before Ethan Vale ever walked through Dalmar's doors. Not out of paranoia, but as insurance. Old compliance habits die hard. I opened my laptop and started downloading everything I'd mirrored from the system before my access had been revoked. Quarterly financial reports, audit trails, internal memos, meeting recordings. And then I opened a folder I'd almost forgotten about, one labeled Q3 Flagged Contracts. The files were from 6 weeks ago. I'd marked them for review, but never got the chance to finish the follow-up before things escalated. Inside were contract drafts between Dalmar and 3 mid-tier consulting firms. Firms Ethan insisted were helping us streamline operations ahead of the IPO. The invoices were suspiciously round, the deliverables vague. One had a scope of work that simply read, Strategic Narrative Positioning. I cross-referenced the payment records. These firms had each been paid over $700,000, all within a span of 12 days. The revenue was then reclassified as internal consulting gains, inflating our earnings on paper. That single maneuver had added nearly $2.9 million to the quarterly statement. I stared at the screen. Slowly, methodically. I began capturing screenshots, saving duplicates, timestamping everything. Then I pulled out the contact information for an old friend at the SEC, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who'd once called me the most by-the-book compliance officer in Chicago. At 9:15 p.m., I sent a single, encrypted message. Whistleblower request. I have documentation of executive-level misreporting and contract manipulation. No public disclosure yet. Protected identity requested. More to follow. Within 20 minutes. I received confirmation. The wheels had started turning. Over the next 3 nights, I organized my evidence into detailed packets. Each folder had a label, a timeline, and internal links to related documents. I wasn't just sending data, I was building a narrative, a story that regulators could follow from the first cooked number to the last forged invoice. And with every folder I finalized, my resolve grew. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about getting my pension back anymore. This was about protecting every employee who still believed the numbers on those balance sheets. About protecting Rachel, and the interns like her, who thought good work still mattered, who didn't know yet how easily truth could be paved over with ambition and a polished slide deck. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. While compiling one of the flagged contracts, I discovered a Word document in the metadata, an earlier draft, accidentally embedded. I opened it. Inside was a tracked change note from Ethan himself. Make sure the signature date reflects last quarter's close. We need it to show revenue this cycle. He had backdated the contracts. Intentionally. My pulse didn't spike. I didn't gasp or curse. I simply saved the file. exported the changelog, and marked the document with a red tag. Intent to defraud. Confirmed. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just reporting questionable accounting practices, I was exposing fraud. By 1:30 a.m., both drives were finalized, one locked in my home safe, the other I placed in an envelope marked attorney-client privileged and dropped in the mailbox on Clark Street the next morning. I walked back home under the soft light of early dawn. The city hadn't woken up yet, but I was wide awake. They thought erasing my badge would erase my voice. What they didn't know is that I was just getting started. The building felt colder that day. It wasn't the temperature. It was something in the air, tense, charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I'd arrived earlier than usual, despite barely sleeping the night before, after sending the whistleblower packet and mailing the legal backup. I expected something to happen, but I didn't expect it to be so silent. The hallways were too quiet. Doors that used to be open were now shut. I passed two executives in the elevator who used to smile politely. They didn't even look at me. A chill started to build at the base of my spine, not from fear, but from recognition, the kind that tells you they know. I walked to my office on the 23rd floor and found the door already ajar. My nameplate had been removed. Inside, the lights were off. My chair was gone. Instead, an envelope sat in the center of my desk, next to a cardboard box, neatly folded. Not even assembled yet. No knock, no announcement, no HR rep in sight. Just a quiet, calculated message. You don't work here anymore. I opened the envelope. The letter was short. 3 lines. Effective immediately. Your position has been eliminated as part of an executive-level restructure. Please vacate the premises within the hour. Personal items will be sent to your address on file. No signature, no name, just legal affairs stamped at the bottom. I stood there, staring at the page. My jaw tightened. My hands curled into fists so tight, my knuckles cracked. But I didn't say a word. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream, because this wasn't a surprise. It was a final move in a game I already knew how to win. I picked up the box and stepped into the hallway. The walk felt longer than usual, like the carpet was dragging against my shoes. My office neighbors averted their eyes. One even ducked into the break room to avoid crossing paths. Nobody wanted to be associated with a ghost. At the elevator, I saw Rachel. Her eyes widened. Ms. Harmon? What's going on? I managed a half smile. It's all right. Rachel, just a change in scenery. Her face flushed with confusion. I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd been pushed out, that the truth was bigger than she could imagine, but I didn't. She didn't need that burden. Not yet. The elevator dinged. I stepped in. She watched the doors close without saying another word. Down in the lobby, 2 security guards waited. One held a clipboard. The other had a badge scanner. I'll need your employee ID, ma'am, the taller one said. I handed it over without hesitation. He nodded once, clicked something on his tablet, and said, You're all set. Am I allowed to say goodbye to my team? I asked, already knowing the answer. Afraid not. We've been instructed to escort you out immediately. I let out a slow breath. Of course. We stepped out into the main corridor, passing the reception desk. The lights flickered above us as we walked. A familiar ping from the operations server echoed from the IT room behind the wall, an automated alert, then another, then 3 more. The security guard paused. Huh, that's strange, he mumbled. What is? I asked. He pointed to a panel on the wall. Red lights were blinking across the building's internal approval system. Some kind of back-end error. It's been popping up all morning. Workflow validation issues, finance, HR, contracts. Nothing's processing. I kept my face neutral, but inside, I felt it. Their internal systems were built on a multi-tiered approval architecture, a failsafe I designed years ago to prevent unauthorized changes. Each high-risk action, budget shifts, contract approvals, compliance overrides, required one final authentication from a senior officer. That officer had always been me. They had locked me out, but the system hadn't caught up. And now, they were trapped in a house they didn't know how to run. I stepped through the front doors without turning back. They wanted me gone? Fine. But they had no idea what they'd just unplugged. The morning light filtered in through the blinds, brushing soft gold across the hardwood floor. It was 7:30 a.m., and the world outside had just started to stir. Across the street, a delivery truck hummed to a stop. A jogger passed by with earbuds in. It was all normal, quiet, ordinary. But inside my apartment, nothing felt normal anymore. I stood in the kitchen in my robe, watching the kettle begin to steam. I didn't rush it. There was no need. I had nowhere to be, and yet, everything was about to happen. I poured hot water over a bag of English breakfast, the way I had every morning for years. The same brand, same chipped mug from a compliance conference in 2003. A morning ritual, only now. It felt less like comfort and more like armor. At 7:42 a.m., I opened my laptop. The first site I loaded wasn't news. It was the SEC's official newsroom. Nothing posted yet. Then Bloomberg, CNBC, Reuters. All still quiet. But the silence didn't fool me. This was the final breath before the tide shifted. My hands were steady as I scrolled through the morning headlines. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I had already passed through those emotions. Now there was just this stillness, controlled, waiting. On my second sip of tea, a vibration on the counter made me glance at my phone. A message. No sender ID. Just a gray bubble with 4 words. You were right. B. I stared at the screen. My pulse didn't jump, but something tightened in my chest. I hadn't heard from anyone on the board since I was escorted out. For a moment, I debated whether it was real. Was it sincere or a trap? But then I remembered, there were still a few decent people in that room. People who had watched Ethan rise too fast, who had doubts but never voiced them. I didn't reply. I just locked the screen and turned back to the laptop. 7:53 a.m. CNBC posted a teaser banner. SEC to hold emergency briefing on corporate reporting irregularities. 9 o'clock a.m. ET. There it was. The first domino. I leaned back in my chair and took another sip of tea. The irony wasn't lost on me. Less than 36 hours ago, I was sitting in my old office, trying to convince executives not to ignore internal warnings. Now, I was a silent witness to their unraveling. No press conference, no podium, just a woman in a robe, watching the world shift from a laptop screen. They thought cutting me out would stop the bleeding. They never realized I wasn't the wound. I was the tourniquet. By 8:15 a.m., Delmar Holdings's internal communications platform lit up, at least what I could see through a former colleague's forwarded screenshots. Emergency all-hands meeting, legal scramble, PR teams pulled from vacation. No one knew what was coming, only that it was big, and it was imminent. I refreshed the SEC newsroom again. Still blank, still waiting. The storm hadn't broken yet, but I could hear it, low, rumbling, inevitable. I picked up my tea and stood by the window. The sky was still blue, the city still calm. But I knew what was coming. They had built their castle on polished glass, and now the first crack had formed. This wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even justice yet. It was the truth, finally making its way to the surface. Slow, certain, unstoppable. I didn't pace the floor. I didn't text anyone. I just stood there, watching the skyline, sipping quietly, breathing deeply. Because sometimes, The most powerful place to be isn't in the boardroom, it's outside, with a clear view of the tower as it begins to shake. At 9 a.m. sharp. It happened. No thunder, no dramatic music. Just a quiet refresh on my laptop screen. And then the headline appeared. CC announces formal investigation into Dalmar Holdings for financial misrepresentation and securities fraud. I exhaled. Slow, steady. Not in shock. Not even in relief. Just a breath I'd been holding for days, finally leaving my lungs. Below the headline, the details began to load. The agency had launched an immediate inquiry into Dalmar's third-quarter earnings, citing irregular revenue recognition, manipulated contracts, and executive-level intent to mislead investors. They named no individuals, yet, but anyone who'd been watching the filings knew exactly where to look. I reached for my tea, now lukewarm, and took a slow sip. My phone buzzed again. Texts, dozens of them. Former colleagues, compliance officers at other firms, even a few journalists I hadn't heard from in years. Some messages just read, "Was this you?" Others were more blunt. "You warned them. It's starting." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Within minutes, CNBC cut to breaking news. The anchor's voice was calm, measured, but I could hear the edge of urgency underneath it. Behind him, the Dalmar logo flickered across the screen in bright red. "We're following developing news this morning. The SEC has officially opened a federal investigation into Dalmar Holdings following allegations of securities fraud. Sources close to the matter suggest whistleblower evidence played a critical role in prompting the inquiry." I leaned back, eyes still on the screen, letting the words soak in like music. They had no idea who the whistleblower was, yet. But the fact that they knew one existed? That was enough. That would rattle every floor of that building. At 9:13 a.m., the real unraveling began. Dalmar's stock, which had opened stable, began to tick downward. At first, it was minor, a few cents. But then it fell again, and again, and again, like dominoes collapsing under their own weight. By 9:19 a.m., the ticker was bleeding red across every major screen. Dalmar Holdings, minus 6.3%, minus 9.2%, minus 12%. Investor chat rooms exploded. Hedge fund Twitter accounts began speculating about insider knowledge. And then, the twist came in, fast and vicious. Someone leaked an internal email. An encrypted screenshot was posted to Reddit, then Twitter, then Bloomberg within minutes. It was traced back to a senior assistant in the legal department, someone I vaguely remembered from a risk committee meeting 2 years ago. The email showed a single damning line, dated 5 days ago. Ethan authorized liquidation of 30% of his equity stake prior to Q3 reporting window. My eyebrows lifted. I hadn't known about that. So Ethan had been covering his tracks after all, cashing out before the fall, before the investigation, before the truth could catch up to him. Or so he thought. It made sense now. His sudden silence in meetings, the rushed timelines, the fake consulting invoices. He hadn't just been trying to make the company look good. He'd been trying to make himself wealthy before it all came apart. And now, every investor who'd once hung on his words was dumping shares like lifeboats on a sinking ship. By 9:27 a.m., trading was halted. Dalmar's market value had dropped 34% in less than 30 minutes. I sat motionless at my kitchen table, staring at the numbers, watching Ethan's empire dissolve in real time. But I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. Because this wasn't a moment of celebration. It was confirmation that doing the right thing, even silently, even painfully, still mattered. I opened my email, my personal one, the only one left untouched, and wrote a single draft. To Rachel, "You may never see this, but I wanted you to know, one day, someone will try to convince you to keep quiet. That comfort is better than conflict." That silence is safe. Don't believe them. The truth doesn't always roar, but sometimes it breaks the world open. I didn't send it, not yet. I just saved it and returned to the screen because the storm wasn't over, but it was finally raining in the right direction. The moment the ticker froze, the panic became real. At 9:27 a.m., the New York Stock Exchange halted all trading of Dalmar Holdings. The red banner flashed across financial terminals, phones, and trading desks nationwide. Trading halted, Dalmar Holdings. Volatility code 542. I refreshed the feed again, but the price had stopped at minus 34%. The silence that followed wasn't relief, it was pressure, like air being sucked from the room before an explosion. Emails poured in, more than I could read. News outlets rotated headlines on a loop, each one more damning than the last. Dalmar accused of systemic fraud, whistleblower allegations, rock investment giant, SEC to subpoena executive communications. Even the reporters looked stunned. They were still catching up to the avalanche they were narrating. The building I had once helped fortify was now burning from the inside out. And the worst part? No one was in control. Inside the company, I imagined the scene: legal teams scrambling to draft statements, PR consultants swarming the phones, Ethan locked in his corner office with the blinds drawn. I could picture him pulling at his collar, barking at assistants, checking a dozen news tabs at once. He wouldn't admit it out loud, but he knew. The floor was gone beneath him, and this wasn't just a bad news cycle, it was collapse. By 10 o'clock a.m., reports surfaced that major institutional investors, pension funds, private equity firms, sovereign wealth entities, had frozen their Dalmar holdings. One by one, internal accounts were suspended, platforms stopped processing trades, citing pending material disclosures. Even employees' retirement portfolios were locked out. People couldn't move their money, couldn't even see it. Dalmar wasn't just bleeding, it was paralyzed. My inbox pinged again. A subject line caught my eye. Class action filed in federal court. Demand $480 million. I clicked it open. A group of shareholders, led by a coalition of investment firms, had filed a formal lawsuit that morning in the Southern District of New York. They were demanding $480 million in damages for losses sustained due to what they claimed was intentional and sustained deception by corporate leadership. $480 million. That wasn't panic money. That was blood money. And deep down, I knew it was only the beginning. The camera cut to Dalmar's corporate HQ. Media vans lined the sidewalk. Reporters huddled behind barriers as security guards kept them from flooding the lobby. The revolving doors spun endlessly, bodies rushing in and out with briefcases, laptops, and half-baked talking points. Inside, it must have felt like a pressure cooker. Emails flying, Slack channels exploding, executives whispering in corners and pointing fingers at one another. Who signed what? Who knew? Who approved? Who erased? They were asking all the right questions. Too late. I imagined the compliance team, what was left of it, sitting in a conference room, staring at systems they no longer understood. Without the master keys, they were locked out of their own protocols. They'd never thought to learn how the machine worked. They'd just assumed someone else would be there to turn the last lever. And now that someone was gone, by 10:32 a.m., trading on Dalmar was still frozen. No statement had been released. No press conference scheduled. The company had gone dark. One of my former colleagues forwarded me an internal screenshot. It showed a Slack message from a junior analyst in finance. Are we allowed to talk to clients right now? No one's answering. I don't even know who's still here. Underneath it, a reply from someone I didn't recognize. Just keep quiet. Don't say anything to anyone. And another. Is Ethan still in the building? I turned off the TV. There was no satisfaction in the noise, no thrill in the downfall, just chaos, sprawled out across a company too arrogant to see its own cracks, too fast to listen, too blind to pause. They hadn't fallen, they'd jumped, and now they were scrambling to build wings on the way down. I stood from the table, finally, and looked out the window once more. This wasn't the end. Not for them. And certainly not for me. The email came in at 8:35 a.m., 2 days after the collapse. I was sitting on my balcony, sun on my face, the hum of traffic rising faintly from the street below, a mug of fresh coffee in one hand, my phone in the other. I wasn't expecting anything important. The worst was over. The investigation had been announced, the lawsuits filed, and Ethan Vale hadn't been seen publicly since his name surfaced in the leaked email. So when I saw the subject line, SEC notification, whistleblower eligibility determination, my heart stilled for just a second. I tapped it open. Ms. Harmon, following our initial review and verification of your submitted materials, we have confirmed that your contributions materially advanced our investigation, per the provisions of the Dodd-Frank Act. You are now officially eligible for a financial award in connection with this case. The estimated award, subject to final resolution, may total up to $13.6 million. Formal paperwork and next steps will be provided within 10 business days. We thank you for your integrity. I read the message 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. Completely. It wasn't just the money. Though yes. That number made me sit back in my chair. It was what it meant. Someone had listened. Someone in the right position, with real authority, had read my files, traced the path I had mapped out, and said, "You were right. This mattered." The SEC didn't give out validation lightly. They didn't thank people for doing their job. So when they did, it meant something. It meant I hadn't shouted into a void. I hadn't wasted those nights sorting documents, second-guessing myself, wondering if it was worth the risk. The reward wasn't the number, it was the confirmation. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight that had lived in my chest for months begin to dissolve. I hadn't just survived the fall, I'd helped cause it. Strategically, deliberately, quietly, like a good compliance officer should. Just as I was about to close the email, another notification buzzed through. This one from a name I hadn't expected to see, Rachel Kim. The subject line was simple. Thank you. I opened it. Ms. Harmon, I hope this doesn't seem inappropriate. I know things ended, strangely, and I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. But I wanted to let you know, I'm still at Dalmar, for now. At least. It's chaos. A lot of people have left. Some departments are frozen, others don't know who's in charge anymore. But I stayed. Not because I believe in the leadership, but because I believe in what you taught me. You once said the hardest part of the job isn't knowing where the line is, it's having the courage to hold it when no one else will. I just wanted to tell you, I stayed because of you. You showed me where the line is. Rachel, my hands paused midair. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing. For all the chaos, all the headlines, all the legal declarations, this was the message that made me close my eyes and finally, truly, exhale. It wasn't just about what I'd torn down. It was about what I might have left behind. I stared out at the skyline as it shimmered in the morning light. The same city, but something had changed, not just in the industry, but in me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't afraid. I was clear. That morning, I didn't make a list. I didn't open spreadsheets. I didn't draft follow-up memos or chase loose ends. I just sat. For the first time in a long time. I allowed myself to feel still. I had fought my war without raising my voice. And somehow, the echo had reached exactly where it needed to, and that was enough. The air was cool, crisp, and still carried a hint of spring. I walked slowly around the edge of the lake, a quiet place tucked away near the north end of the city, where the buildings gave way to tall trees and soft water. Ducks floated silently across the surface. A runner passed me on the gravel path. I nodded politely and kept walking. It had been a week since the email from the SEC, 3 days since the message from Rachel. I hadn't returned any calls. Not yet. My lawyer told me I had time. Time to breathe. Time to process. Time to decide what came next. And that's why I was here. I paused on a wooden bench overlooking the water and let myself be still. The breeze carried faint laughter from a family nearby. Life went on. It always did. But for the first time in months. I wasn't chasing it. I was letting it come to me. I pulled out a small notebook from my coat pocket, the one I'd carried every day for 27 years. The corners were frayed now. The spine had cracked twice. But the pages still held every handwritten note, every policy tweak, every idea that once shaped the bones of Dalmar's compliance structure. I flipped to the very first page. At the top, in neat cursive, was a line I had written on my first day at the company. Make yourself indispensable, ethically. I smiled. That version of me was 29, fresh-faced, sharper with rules than with people. I wore stiff blazers and carried too many highlighters. But I believed in the work. I believed companies could do better, be better, if someone just held the line. And for almost 3 decades. I did. I closed the notebook and looked out at the lake. And then the question came. If I had known it would end like this, would I still have stayed? I didn't rush to answer. I let the question linger, like a ripple moving across the water. Would I still choose the late nights, the stress, the silence? I thought of Rachel, of the boardroom, of the whistleblower packet now sitting in a federal archive. I thought of the truth finally breaking the surface, not with noise, but with weight. And then I nodded. Slowly. Yes, I whispered, because I built something they never could destroy. Not the systems, not the protocols, the standard. That was my legacy, not a plaque on the wall, not a title or a pension, but the standard I left behind, and the people I quietly inspired to uphold it long after I was gone. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a new message appeared. Not from Rachel this time, from a woman named Elena Torres, the executive director of the National Whistleblower Advocacy Group. Ms. Harmon, we've followed your case closely. Your silence has spoken louder than most press conferences. We'd like to formally invite you to serve as a strategic advisor to our organization. If you're willing, we'd like you to share your story. I stared at the message. For a long time, I had no interest in telling my story. I never wanted to become the center of anything. I had always believed the work should speak louder than the worker. But now, maybe that silence had run its course. Maybe now. The story wasn't about me anymore. It was about every person like me, those who stayed late, asked hard questions, and got pushed out for being right too early. Maybe my voice still had one more purpose. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The sun caught the edge of the lake, setting it ablaze with golden light. I stood, brushed the bench clean, and walked on. Not because I had to, but because I could. They erased my name from the building, but not from the record, and certainly not from the memory of the next woman who refuses to sign a lie.